My Thomas Story Library, Arthur. This is a story about Arthur, a proud tank engine. He arrived on the island of Sodor with a spotless record, but soon found himself in a sticky situation. Arthur the big tank engine had just arrived on the island of Sodor. It was his first day at work on the Fat Controller's railway. I must be on time, I must be on time, Arthur worried as he chuffed through the countryside. He didn't want to be late. Right on time, smiled the Fat Controller. This is Arthur. He will help you shunt trucks and pull freight. Nice to meet you, said Arthur politely. And he's got a spotless record, the Fat Controller added. What's a spotless record? Whispered Percy. It means he's never done anything naughty, Thomas frowned. At Brendam Docks, the three engines were soon working together. Thomas and Percy knew that they weren't supposed to bump the trucks, but it was such fun. Join in, Arthur, laughed Thomas. No, thank you, said Arthur quietly. He didn't want to spoil his spotless record. Arthur's first job was to push a line of trucks to the market. He coupled up behind the trucks, which were loaded up with crates of fruit. The trucks, though, were not behaving themselves and sang songs to tease Arthur. Root too tall! Come on, let's go! The fruit's going muddy 'cause you're too slow! How rude! Huffed Arthur. The truck's singing gave Thomas a naughty idea. The Fat Controller doesn't like the trucks to sing, said Thomas. You must tell them to stop. Thank you, Thomas, said Arthur. I will. Arthur puffed steadily out of the docks. The trucks will cause trouble for Arthur if they're not allowed to sing, laughed Thomas. Arthur was chuffing cheerfully through the countryside when the trucks began to sing again. Chug, chug, chuff! You tug and puff, but you're so slow you got no puff! No singing, said Arthur firmly. It may be my first day, but I won't fall for your tricks. The troublesome trucks were cross. If Arthur won't let us sing, one truck whispered. We'll teach him a lesson, chimed the others. The troublesome trucks put on their brakes and made their wheels screech and squeak along the tracks. Arthur struggled over bridges and huffed and puffed through tunnels. When poor Arthur puffed to the top of Gordon's Hill, the trucks whooshed down the other side, laughing all the way. Suddenly, Arthur's driver spotted a red signal at the bottom of the hill. He put on the brakes. But Arthur couldn't stop in time. Fruits of all shapes and sizes from the troublesome trucks flew into the air and landed splat, splot, splat, all over Arthur. Arthur was terribly sad. It was his first day on the Fat Controller's railway, and his spotless record was ruined. Soon the Fat Controller arrived. What has happened here? He said crossly. The trucks were singing, said Arthur. I told them to stop, but they pushed me too fast. Please, sir, it's my fault, said Thomas sadly. He told the Fat Controller what he had done. Your record is still spotless, Arthur, the Fat Controller said. Thomas, clear up this mess at once. Soon Harvey arrived with the breakdown crane and lifted Arthur back onto the rails. Thomas stayed behind to help the workmen clear the track. It took a very long time to clear up the sticky mess. By the time Thomas puffed slowly home, it was dark. When Thomas arrived back at Tidmouth Sheds, Arthur's crew had cleaned the squashed fruit from his funnel. Arthur looked spotless and sparkled from buffer to dome. I'm sorry I played a trick on you, said Thomas. That's all right, said Arthur. Thank you for telling the truth. Well, I never had a spotless record to ruin, smiled Thomas. From that moment, The engines knew they would become the best of friends. My Thomas Story Library, Caroline. This is a story about Caroline, a lazy car who thought she would never like engines. Then one day, she found they could be really useful. On a beautiful sunny day on the island of Sodor, Caroline the car was sitting at the side of a cricket pitch. She was watching her owner play a very long game of cricket. What a pleasant day, thought Caroline. Caroline liked to sit and watch people playing cricket because it meant they weren't hurtling about the countryside, revving her delicate engine and going too fast. Meanwhile, at the transfer yards, Stepney the Bluebell engine was chatting to the other engines. "Tracks are fun," he was telling Percy. Percy was very surprised. Surely no engines actually liked trucks. "Well, you can pull some of mine if you like," said Percy. Percy's driver agreed that Stepney could pull some of the trucks. Stepney was so happy, he set off around the island with a big smile on his face. While Caroline was happily dozing in the sunshine, Stepney pulled up at a signal behind her. Caroline didn't like engines very much. She thought they were silly because they liked to rush around too fast. Suddenly, the batsman hit the ball. It flew high into the sky above Stepney. Clunk went the signal. Thump went the ball and landed in a truck. Neither Stepney nor his driver noticed the ball land in one of Stepney's trucks. "Come along," puffed Stepney to the trucks. "Stop!" shouted the players. "That's our only ball!" "Wake up, Caroline!" called the players as they clambered inside her cab. "Follow that train!" Caroline coughed crossly and rolled down the road. Stepney wasn't going very quickly, and Caroline soon came up behind him. "Toot toot!" called Caroline. The players shouted, but the driver was too far away to hear them properly. He thought they wanted a race. "Faster, Stepney!" shouted the driver, and Stepney began to puff along very fast. Poor Caroline! She wasn't happy at all. Her owner was making her go faster and faster. As Caroline turned a corner, Stepney disappeared. "Hurrah!" she cried. "That silly train has fallen into a hole. I can go home now." But Caroline's owner only made her go faster. He pushed her up a steep hill and down the other side. As Caroline hurtled down the hill, she could see Stepney sitting in a station at the bottom. Caroline cluttered into the station. She was wheezing and coughing and spluttering. Caroline hoped Stepney wouldn't leave before the players got their ball back. The players ran towards Stepney. "Our ball!" they cried. "Where's our ball?" The driver looked very confused. "Your ball?" he asked. "Why would we have your ball?" The players explained everything as they began to search in Stepney's trucks. The trucks were wriggling and jiggling, making it harder for the players to look. "Stop it!" Stepney told the naughty trucks. "Found it!" cried a player. "Let's get back to the game!" Stepney looked at Caroline. She was worn out. Stepney didn't think Caroline would want to drive anywhere. Stepney spoke to his driver. "Do you think we could give Caroline a lift?" he asked. "She looks very tired, and I don't think she can make it back to the cricket pitch." Stepney's driver thought that was a splendid idea. He spoke to the station master and the signalman. "Stepney has had an idea," he explained. "Can you think of a way we could give Caroline a lift?" Very soon they had a plan and were busily explaining it to the players. Caroline wasn't too happy with the plan. She felt very nervous riding on a truck on the railway line. "Just you be careful," she said to Stepney. "Don't go too fast, please." "I'll be careful," promised Stepney. Stepney uncoupled all of his trucks apart from a flat truck. Caroline was rolled onto the flat truck, and a brake van was hooked up behind. The players all climbed on board. Stepney began to pull out of the station. Caroline had her eyes tightly shut. "Oh!" she cried. Slowly, Caroline noticed that she wasn't being shaken about at all. She opened her eyes to find that Stepney was going quite fast. Caroline looked around the countryside. She realized that she didn't mind going fast, especially when somebody else was doing all the work. Stepney safely returned Caroline and all the players to the cricket pitch. Stepney's driver, the station master, and signalman settled down to watch the match. "Perhaps engines aren't so silly after all," said Caroline to Stepney's driver. "They can certainly save the wear on a poor car's tyres." My Thomas Story Library, Murdoch. This is a story about Murdoch the Tender Engine. When he joined my railway, he thought the other engines talked too much, but he soon realised that they weren't that noisy after all. Thomas, Harvey and Salty love working at Brendan Docks. Day and night, day after day, cargo ships arrive at the docks with goods from all over the world. This keeps the engines very busy. But sometimes, after working very hard all day, they are so tired that their axles ache. One day, the Fat Controller decided to bring in a new tender engine to help. The new engine was long, and he had 10 wheels. "This is Murdoch," said the Fat Controller. "He is going to pull goods on the main line." "Ahoy, Murdoch!" shouted Salty. "Welcome, Murdoch!" called Harvey. "You're the biggest engine I've ever seen!" cried Thomas. "You're a chatty lot," said Murdoch quietly. Murdoch didn't like chatty engines or the noisy docks. He liked quiet runs through the countryside with just the noise of his engine and the trucks for company. Soon Murdoch was coupled to a long line of heavy trucks. His boiler strained, his wheels started to turn, and the mighty engine chuffed away. But Murdoch didn't puff through the countryside. He puffed through a busy builder's yard with banging, hammering and drilling all around him. Murdoch longed for some peace and quiet. But everywhere he went, it was noisy and crowded. At the end of the day, Murdoch was looking forward to a good night's rest. But when he got back to the engine sheds, Salty and Harvey were full of questions. "What's the longest train you've ever pulled?" asked Harvey. "Have you ever worked in France?" added Salty. "Please!" chuffed Murdoch. "I want some peace and quiet. I don't want to share a shed with chatterboxes." "No need to be rude," huffed Harvey. "We're only being friendly," steamed Salty. The next morning, Murdoch collected another long heavy train. This time, he chuffed into the beautiful countryside. It was splendid. All Murdoch could hear was the gentle rumbling of his wheels and the soothing puffing of his engine. At last, he had some peace and quiet. But suddenly, Murdoch's driver applied the brakes, and he screeched to a halt. There were sheep on the track. Lots of sheep. "The sheep escaped from that field," said the driver. "Through that broken fence," added the fireman. The driver and fireman tried to chase the sheep back into the field. First this way, then that way. They tried everything, but nothing worked. The sheep were bleating louder and louder. "It's no use," grumbled the driver. By now, the driver and fireman were very cross and tired. Then they realized that Murdoch's steam had stopped. "The boiler's got no pressure," cried the fireman. Murdoch's fire had gone out. "I'll go and phone for help," said the driver. The Fat Controller was enjoying his afternoon cup of tea when he got the call. "Murdoch is in trouble?" he exclaimed. "I'll send help right away." And the Fat Controller went straight to the engine sheds. Meanwhile, Murdoch was stuck with all the noisy sheep. He was very unhappy. The valley wasn't peaceful anymore. Murdoch had never heard so much noise. But at last, the farmer and his dog were beginning to move the sheep away. "Chatty engines are much better than noisy sheep," muttered Murdoch. Just then, Salty and Harvey chucked into view. "I'm glad to see you two," exclaimed Murdoch. "We'll get you out of here in no time," cried Salty. Before long, Harvey and Salty were hooked up to Murdoch. Then, with a heave and a huff, they chuffed out of the valley together. That night, the engines were back in the sheds. "Thank you for rescuing me," said Murdoch. "I'm sorry I was cross. I'm pleased to share a shed with you." "And we're pleased to have you," replied Harvey. "Aye, we are," added Salty. Murdoch had found his peace and quiet at last. My Thomas Story Library, Neville. This is a story about Neville, a little engine who just wanted to be friends. But Thomas and the others wouldn't give him a chance, and that got them all into trouble. One morning, the Fat Controller made an announcement. "A new engine has arrived on the island," he said. "His name is Neville. You must all make him feel welcome." "I wonder what this Neville will be like," Thomas said to Emily. "I hope he's a steamy like us," Emily replied. Later that day, Thomas had stopped at a signal when the signalman called down to him. "The bridge ahead is unsafe," he said. "It needs mending before any engines can cross it. You must go to the docks and collect some iron to repair the bridge." At the docks, Ari and Bert were with Neville, the new engine. Neville was a steamy, but he had a square body like a diesel. Ari and Bert were feeling naughty. "We'll help you jump those trucks," they said. But they pushed Neville hard into the trucks. The diesels laughed. Neville looked sad. "It's not our fault if you're a silly steamy," oiled Bert, and they laughed even harder. When Thomas arrived at the docks, he thought he saw Ari and Bert laughing with Neville. "There's the new engine," Thomas thought. "He seems to be friends with the diesels. How strange." Thomas chugged off to Knapford Station. "We'd better be careful of that new engine," he warned James at the platform. "I saw him laughing with Ari and Bert at the docks." James was shocked. A steamy friends with diesels? He chugged off to take on water. "That new engine Neville is best friends with the diesels," he puffed when Percy passed by. "He doesn't like steamies. Thomas told me." Later, Percy met Emily at a red signal. "Don't go near Neville, the new engine," he told her. "The diesels have told him to biff into steamies. James heard it from Thomas." When Thomas arrived at Crovan's Gate, the Fat Controller was there. "I have a very important job for you," he boomed. "You must warn all the engines not to cross the bridge until it is repaired." Thomas felt proud. It was a really useful job. Then he heard a whistle. Someone was coming. He had to warn them. But when Thomas saw it was Neville, he forgot all about his important job. He's pulling Annie and Clarabelle, Thomas sulked crossly. They're my coaches, not his. Hello, puffed Neville perkily. I'm not talking to you, Thomas huffed. Neville was puzzled and sad. When Emily pulled in next to him, Neville gave her a big friendly smile. He hoped she would be nicer than Thomas. Emily wheezed out steam. It's no use trying to make friends with me, she said grandly. I know you're going to biff into all the steamies, just like the Diesels told you to. Neville didn't know why she was being so horrid to him. But the station master blew his whistle, and Neville had to chug sadly away. Then Emily saw Thomas. Thanks for warning us about Neville, she said. Percy told me what you told James. Thomas was very surprised. I only said I saw Neville with the Diesels, he cried. But before Emily could answer, Toby arrived. Have you heard? He puffed. Salty saw Harry and Bert be horrible to Neville at the docks. So the Diesels weren't Neville's friends at all. All of a sudden, Thomas remembered where Neville was going. Neville's heading for the broken bridge, he cried. I must stop him. Neville was speeding along. Suddenly, he saw a barrier on the track. He slammed on his brakes, but it was too late. His front wheels went over the broken end of the bridge. Thomas came racing up and saw what had happened. He knew it was all his fault. Then he had an idea. He would pull Neville back. Thomas steamed slowly and carefully onto the bridge. He gently bumped Clarabelle, and Thomas's driver coupled Clarabelle to him. Thomas was very scared. Slowly and steadily, he began to pull Neville back from the edge. The bridge creaked. Thomas had to hurry. With one big puff, he pulled Neville to safety. Thanks, whistled Neville. What a relief! I should have warned you, puffed Thomas, but I was too busy believing silly stories. I thought you didn't like steamies. Can you forgive me? Oh yes, peeped Neville. Let's be friends. Thomas gave Neville a long, happy peep peep. From now on, he wanted to be the best friend Neville had ever had. My Thomas Story Library, Freddie. This is a story about Fearless Freddie. Everyone had heard tales of Fearless Freddie. He thought he was the fastest engine in all of Sodor. But then Renez and Skarloey challenged Freddie to a race. One day, an old friend was returning to the narrow gauge railway. His name was Fearless Freddie. He was fast, fun, and fearless. Thomas brought Freddie to the transfer yards. Hello, Sir Handel, wheezed Freddie. Hello, Freddie, whistled Sir Handel. I haven't seen you for years. Fearless Freddie is back, puffed Freddie. I didn't know you two were friends, peeped Thomas. Oh, yes, puffed Sir Handel. Freddie was the fastest engine in the hills. Suddenly, Renez and Skarloey raced into the yards. I'm the winner, peeped Skarloey. No, I am, wheezed Renez. Who are you? Pouted Freddie. We're the fastest engines in the hills, chimed Skarloey. I'll show you who's fastest, boasted Freddie. I'll race you to the mountain. Freddie was sure he was going to win. Freddie huffed and puffed up the mountain. It was harder than he remembered. Flatten my funnel, he wheezed. I used to be able to chop up here in no time. Renez and Skarloey were waiting to start the race. Freddie puffed in slowly. All right, Fearless Freddie, tooted Renez. Ready, steady, go! Whistled Skarloey, and they were off. Freddie was racing very fast, but soon he began to run out of puff. Oh no! Those young engines will bump my buffers! He chuffed as he slowed down. Suddenly, Freddie had an idea. He remembered an old track. The old Rocky Way, he thought excitedly. No one will remember that now. Freddie steamed down the track. Renez and Skarloey did not see that he had taken a shortcut. The tracks on the old Rocky Way were old and wobbly, but this way was much quicker. Freddie got to the bottom of the mountain in no time. Renez and Skarloey chuffed in. You're so fast, wheezed Renez. Race you again, huffed Skarloey. Please, Fearless Freddie. Of course, Fearless Freddie never says no to a race, boasted Freddie. Renez and Skarloey were soon ready to stop. Renez and Skarloey were soon ready to race again. We'll race you down the other side this time, said Renez. The other side of the mountain is very steep, peeped Freddie. You're not scared, are you? Teased Skarloey. Of course not. I'm Fearless Freddie, chuffed Freddie. Off we go! Freddie raced ahead of the other engines, but he began to run out of puff again. Fearless Freddie didn't want to lose. I can take the craggy track, and then I will win. So Freddie took another shortcut. The track was old and wobbly, just like the last one. Freddie was usually fearless, but this time even he was a little frightened. Freddie soon arrived at the bottom of the mountain, safe and sound. But Renez and Skarloey were not safe and sound. The track was very steep, and Renez had raced right off the rails. Skarloey raced up to Freddie. Renez has come off the track, cried Skarloey. I don't know where he is. We were trying to catch you, Fearless Freddie, but you were too fast. Freddie knew he hadn't been fast at all. He had tricked the little engines, and now Renez was in trouble. Sir Handel puffed in with the thin controller. He had heard what had happened to Renez. It's all my fault, sniffed Freddie. Freddie told everyone how he had won the races. You tricked us, tooted Skarloey, and now Renez is lost and in trouble. No, he isn't, whistled Freddie loudly. I can find him. I know all the tracks. Please, sir, follow me. And so Freddie steamed away to rescue Renez. Freddie knew another forgotten track, the old mountainside run. He led the rescue party down to the valley, and there was Renez. I'm so happy you found me, peeped Renez. So am I, puffed Freddie. The thin controller, the fireman, Freddie, Sir Handel, and Skarloey pulled Renez back onto the track. All the engines chucked cheerfully back to the transfer yards. I'm sorry I tricked you, puffed Freddie. You're much faster engines than me. But you know all the old tracks, peeped Renez. Please tell us about them. So Freddie began to tell the young engines tales about the old tracks. Everyone was happy that Fearless Freddie was back.